Skeletal. Chapter 1. Bennett maneuvered the drone to hover over the abandoned house. The weed-infested drive could be seen leading into the woods, untrampled by the passage of any vehicles. "Nobody's been out here for months," he said, half speaking to himself. Fingers tapping across the keyboard of a laptop. Sophia didn't look up as she spoke. "Why are you so infatuated with that creepy house?" "I don't know," Bennett mumbled, focusing the drone's camera on a grimy window to look inside. "It's just weird." Smutty spoke up from the gaming chair he sat perched in. "I'll tell you what's weird. The three of us spending the entire summer in your bedroom. There's got to be something else to do." He suddenly lunged out of the chair, nearly colliding with the table. "Hey, be careful." "Sorry, bro." Smutty sat back down and picked up the controller, inspecting it. "It's fine. No damage." Bennett snarked. You could buy your own controller." "But there are no jobs." Smutty leaned his head back, staring at the ceiling. Sophia chimed in. "I heard a lot of people lost their gigs at the marina. Things are so bad that the tourists aren't even coming this year." Smutty agreed. "Tommy got his hours cut at the garage. They got no business either." Bennett only half listened to the other as he stared intently at the house on the phone screen. "This place is huge, but I've never heard anybody talk about it." The lights on the console suddenly died, and the whirring of the ceiling fan and appliances was replaced by complete silence. Bennett cursed under his breath, hoping it was just a surge, but it wasn't. He landed the drone in the safe spot near the old house and took his phone out of the drone controller to call his mother. Her voice was a mixture of frustration and resignation. "The bill isn't due until the 17th. Bennett pressed his fingers into his forehead and sighed. "Today is the 18th. She sighed heavily. "Shit. I guess I lost track of the days. I'll call and get it turned back on, but it might take a while. Hey, if it's still off in a couple hours, move the food from the fridge to the freezer, okay?" "Yeah, okay." "Honey, I'm sorry." Bennett shook his head. "Mom, it's okay. Really. You've been working double shifts. We'll survive a few hours without power, so no worries." He sighed and put the phone down on his desk. Smutty chimed in. "We could go scope out that creepy old house. Ain't like we got anything better to do." Bennett hesitated, knowing they couldn't stay here. Downtown held no appeal, and the thought of encountering their less than savory peers made his skin crawl. From a recent visit, he knew they shouldn't trespass on someone else's property. But if there was nobody out there, would it really matter? The moments ticked by in the darkness, and the desire to escape the suffocating boredom proved too strong to resist. "Yeah, let's check it out." Sophia questioned the wisdom in this choice, but she definitely wasn't going back to her house, and she shrugged. Whatever. The three trekked down the serpentine dirt road, their footsteps kicking up dust in the summer heat. The woods surrounded them, a sea of green that whispered softly every time the foliage caught the breeze. Bennett led the way, the drone's GPS guiding them like a beacon. As the abandoned house finally came into view, the extent of its neglect became apparent. Weeds, thick and unruly, had taken over the once manicured lawn, their tendrils snaking up the weathered walls as if nature itself sought to drag the structure back into the ground. The windows, clouded with grime, stared back at them like soulless eyes. "Damn, this place is straight out of a horror flick," Smutty remarked, his bravado masking the unease that all three felt. Bennett led them to the right, and they took their time circling the house, its true size revealing itself as they circled, and finally made it back to where they had started from. It was big, a remnant of an era where grandeur could be afforded. Smutty, seized by a sudden impulse, bounded up the porch steps and rapped his knuckles against the front door. "Yo, DoorDash!" he called out, his voice lost in the stillness. He jiggled the handle, but the door remained steadfast, locked tight in its frame of weathered wood. Bennett focused his attention on the drone's live feed as he again hovered over the roof. Sophia leaned in to look, her gaze taking in the drone's view. It was obvious that this place had been abandoned for a very long time. Their contemplation was interrupted by Smutty's triumphant shout from around the corner. "Hey, I found an unlocked door!" Sophia's eyes widened. "Ben, there's a difference between trespassing and breaking and entering. We could get in serious trouble." Bennett paused, weighing the risks. The house's emptiness beckoned him, its secrets whispering promises of discovery. "There's nobody here, Soph. We're not going to hurt anything by taking a look around." He turned to Smutty, his voice stern. "Do not hurt anything." Smutty's laughter rang out, a sharp contrast to the eerie stillness that blanketed the property. "Chill, bro. We are here to observe only." Bennett pushed the door open. As he stepped through the door, the musty air enveloped him, carrying with it the weight of years of neglect. The others followed, and the floorboards creaked beneath their feet, echoing in the sparsely furnished room. The trio exchanged glances, their hearts pounding in unison as they stood inside a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The stove had dials, not a screen. The kettle that sat on one of the burners looked like a tarnished antique prop from a movie, and the refrigerator had rounded edges and corners. "It's like stepping through a time portal." Sophie's eyes narrowed as she looked at the small, carved glass salt and pepper shakers on the spindly wooden kitchen table. "Who lived here?" Bennett spoke in a low voice. "I have no idea. I haven't looked it up yet." The absence of electricity felt more profound than it had at Bennett's place. It was obvious that there hadn't been power or anyone living here for ages. The trio slowly navigated down a hallway and found a study, gloomily lit by a small grime-covered window. The furniture had succumbed to the ravages of time, rickety frames covered in dust. There was a bookshelf with old and tattered volumes lining the shelves and a small roll-top desk with the cover drawn down. A faded and cracked leather couch sat facing an ancient, soot-covered fireplace. Smutty's voice was just above a whisper. "There are no electronics, not even an old phone." Bennett wiped sweat from his brow. "I'm thinking that whoever lived here didn't have a lot of friends to call on the phone." He looked down at the old wooden floor and noticed small droppings in the corner with faint prints of tiny feet etched into the dust. Sophie's voice came from across the room. "I wonder if it was this guy." She stood looking at a sepia-toned photograph of a man wearing an old suit, round spectacles, and a bowler hat. One hand rested on top of a cane he leaned upon, and the other held forth a document that read "Deed" along the top with unreadable script filling the page below it. "That's crazy," Smutty whispered. "Like from the pioneer days. When was this taken?" None of them had an answer. They walked out of the study and continued down the hallway. The ceiling was high and hallways spacious, but the rooms were all to their right, facing the outside of the house. Some of the doors were open, revealing bedrooms for guests. There were old beds and rocking chairs, small rugs, cedar chests, and old bureaus topped with white pitchers inside of large bowls. Some rooms had mirrors and some a vanity for a lady, while others were just sitting rooms with antique settees. A few of the rooms were locked. As they explored, Bennett's attention was drawn to the peculiar design of the house and the fact that there were no doors on the left side of the hallway and no passage that would lead to the interior. His mind tried to make sense of the architectural anomaly when he realized they had also not seen a staircase leading up to the second floor. Bennett voiced his thought aloud. "On it," Smutty said, instantly accepting the challenge, and he doubled back to scout. "How long do you think this place has been abandoned?" Sophie kept her voice low. But curiosity had replaced her earlier trepidation. "I have no idea," Bennett said, "but longer than a few months. Still, it's not all broken down, or anything. Maybe a year." "Maybe." Sophie stared into an ornate mirror, speckled with black spots of age. "It's hard to imagine anyone living like this." Bennett nodded. "Yeah, I was thinking the same." "Found it!" Smutty's voice rang down the hall, jarring the silence. Bennett and Sophia walked the rest of the way to come full circle to the kitchen where Smutty stood next to a thin door that Bennett had assumed opened to a pantry. "You're not going to believe this shit." Smutty bounded up the thin stairwell. The other two followed to find there was no railing and no light. Bennett felt claustrophobia seize him as he climbed up the narrow flights, but that alleviated when they emerged into a hallway similar to the one downstairs. But here the mystery deepened as they faced a large, open room that sat in the exact center of the house. Relieved to be free of the stairway, Bennett walked into the room that seemed like a cross between a library and a laboratory. The walls were covered by giant maps and ornate paintings. A massive, antique globe sat next to an equally oversized wooden banquet table covered with books and pens and papers, and in the exact center of the room stood a large fireplace, built to be viewable from the front and the back. Sophia's voice was low with trepidation and wonder. "I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen a fireplace like that. Bro, this is crazy. This is like rich Ivy League shit." Smutty's voice trailed off as he stared at an oversized painting of a reclining woman in long white robes. A monkey-like creature perched on her chest. A horse with pale eyes stood in the background, looking over them. Bennett and Sophia stared at the fireplace. In the center was a collection of empty grates, and on one side of the round, ceramic shape of a separate flue was nearly surrounded by brick. Sophia looked at it questioningly, then looked up toward the ceiling, where a separate soot-covered hole indicated the flue to this room and the one to the side joined together. Sophia's voice took an edge of concern. "There's another fireplace downstairs." She looked at Bennett, in the center of the house. Bennett stared with a blank expression at the semi-hidden flue. "Yo, Smut, what do you make of this?" Smutty made his way over. "Well, would you look at that?" He looked at Bennett with a sarcastic expression. "It would appear that somebody has tried to hide something from us." Then he smiled. "But as we all know, nothing stays hidden from me." He walked back to the door leading to the staircase and disappeared. Sophia's eyes narrowed. "You think you'll actually find anything?" "Smutty? He has a gift for finding shit people want to hide. Bro was digging through his pop's hidden stashes before he was 6. He didn't get his name from nowhere." Sophie rolled her eyes. "Yes, we all know how he got his name." Bennett shrugged. "Hey, he found the stairs. Who knows what else he'll dig up?" Sophia walked to the table covered in books and papers. Bennett glanced at her and was happy she was here with him. She had made the cut to go to the university for the summer and acquire college credits, but she couldn't afford housing, and he knew that she was both heartbroken and pissed over it. Her family was useless, spending all their money on cars and stupid shit for themselves, and she didn't qualify for aid, so she was stuck here. As she leafed through the papers on the table, he knew she would find a way to get to that school next year, and he wrestled with the feelings of wanting that for her, but dying at the thought of her leaving. "Hey, snap out of it!" He jerked his head back and looked at her. She was holding up a sheet of paper, the color of old, yellowed parchment. "What is that?" She shined her light in it, then looked back at Bennett. "You tell me." He looked and could see that it was some freaky, hand-drawn creature's skeleton surrounded by text written in a script he did not know. Sophia laid the sheet back on the table, pulled her phone from her pocket, and began taking pictures. "I don't recognize the language," Bennett admitted, "but the monster skeleton is nice. You know, the art of sketching has been lost on the modern generation." The massive echoing of the wood creaking and groaning echoed through the entire house and startled both of them. Where they stood, there was a split second of silence. Then it came again. Bennett shouted, "Smutty, what are you doing?" Smutty's voice came from downstairs. "It's okay, I think I found it." Bennett's heart raced as he and Sophia rushed downstairs. bursting into the kitchen. "Where are you?" "This way! You aren't going to believe this!" They raced around a corner, and there was Smutty, standing beside two large panels of the wall he had pulled open like doors, revealing a dark and dusty alcove with another massive wooden door only feet away. The door was covered in iron bands, like something out of a castle, complete with a large keyhole under the wrought iron handle. Needless to say, it's locked. Smutty looked at the other two, who stood in shock. "Don't worry, nothing is broken. The walls were built to swing open. It's just been a while, so they creak a little." "How in the hell did you figure that out?" Sophie was incredulous. Smutty just smiled and spread his arms. Bennett rolled his eyes. "Dude, you gave us a heart attack. It sounded like the house was falling over." "You wanted me to find the center. Here it is." The weary teen shrugged. Bennett had a hand over his chest. Sophie stared daggers at the impishly smiling figure of Smutty, who was obviously proud of his achievement. Ben stared back at the locked door, curiosity consuming him. He recalled the study they had passed earlier, with the desk that had the cover pulled down. Without a word, he turned and hurried back to the room to roll the cover up. There lay a metal key ring, its size substantial, and in the center hung a large ornate key of the style that matched the archaic-looking door. He rushed back to the hidden chamber and pushed the key into the lock, his breath catching in his throat as he had to turn the key strongly before he heard the satisfying click of the mechanism giving way. As the door pulled open, the three stared into complete darkness. The room beyond devoid of any windows. Bennett hesitated, his instincts warring with his desire to uncover the secret of what lay within. Making a decision, he turned to his friends, his voice low and determined. "I'm going to fly the drone in. Wait here." He retrieved the drone from outside, his hands trembling slightly as he powered it on. Slowly, carefully, he guided it into the room, its small lights cutting through the inky blackness. As the drone's camera feed appeared on his phone screen, the trio huddled together, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. The drone's light revealed shadow that slowly took shape into a sight that sent shivers down their spines. In the center of the space, bathed in the faint, eerie glow, stood a small log cabin. "Oh my God," Sophia breathed, her voice shaking as she stared at the sight before them. The old log cabin, hidden within the confines of the larger room, sat forlornly in the dark, its weathered exterior a stark contrast to the more modern home surrounding it. The drone's light cast haunting shadows across the scene. Even Smutty took a step back, his bravado faltering. "This is some next-level creepy shit," he muttered, his eyes darting nervously between the cabin and the hallway behind them. But Bennett was consumed by an inexplicable curiosity and refused to be deterred. He guided the drone back to him and landed it so that he could carry it as a flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness. With measured steps, he moved to the right and kept the light on the cabin, slowly circling the house until he made it all the way around and stood again at what served as a rough-hewn front door. There was no lock, only a length of frayed rope that pulled apart in his hand as he took it up. Still, there was enough room to slide his fingers in and pulled it open, heart pounding against his ribcage. He shined the beam into the cabin's domain. The air inside was heavy and cool, the musty scent of wood and mold permeating every breath. The dirt floor beneath his feet was dusty with the years that had passed. The walls were close around him, pressing in and igniting the claustrophobia he had felt earlier on the staircase. Then it moved the light methodically, revealing the cabin's secrets and his world tilted on its axis, reality bending with the impossible sight before him. Laid out on a large handmade wooden table was a massive skeleton, its form both human and decidedly not. Sophia screamed behind him, the sound piercing the stillness of the room as she stumbled backward, her hands clasped over her mouth in horror. Bennett stood transfixed by the macabre display, the light from his drone joined by Smutty's phone as they kept their lights trained on the skeleton. Smutty slowly whispered, "Holy shit," his mind struggling to comprehend what lay before them. The bones of the skeleton had been arranged, placed in order like a man, but its proportions were all wrong. Its bones too large, too elongated to be human. And the head, dear God, the head. It was the skull of an animal, its massive teeth gleaming in the light. Claws, wicked and curved, tipped the ends of skeletal fingers, their purpose all too clear. Smutty's hand shook as he raised his phone, the shutter sound clicking as he captured the terrifying image. He then slowly lowered the phone and reached out with his fingers, gently tracing them down the skull of the beast. "No!" Bennett lunged at Smutty, pushing him away from the skull. "Damn, Ben, chill!" Smutty rubbed his shoulder where Bennett had hit him. "Don't lose your shit, man. I didn't break it." Bennett was lost for words. In that moment, it began to dawn on the three that what had been a game was now something beyond their understanding, something dark. A line had been crossed, and the consequences of their actions remained as shrouded in darkness as the cabin they stood in. Sophie's instinct to run screamed in her head. Smutty was still panning his phone light around the cabin's interior, the beam illuminating a space that existed out of time. Shelves lined the walls, their surfaces laden with an array of esoteric objects. Jars were filled with unidentifiable substances, and bowls brimmed with crystalline powders. There were bones, feathers, and sticks arranged in arcane patterns, every item handmade, crafted with a purpose that their modern sensibilities could not comprehend. In the back of the cabin stood a fireplace, its stone chimney rising into the roof above, and an iron pot hung from a hook, suspended over long, cold ashes. Sophia, pulse hammering, peered into the corner, and recognition dawned upon her face. She slowly approached a small table, its surface covered in stacks of yellow parchment. The beam of her flashlight danced over the pages, revealing the script, symbols, and characters now familiar to her eyes. "This is the same as the papers upstairs," she whispered, her fingers gently handling the fragile parchment. "This is where he got them." She raised her phone, capturing a series of images. Bennett looked at her. "Who got them?" She stared at the pictures she had taken as she spoke. "The man in the picture." Bennett was about to ask how she knew when the drone beeped, and the battery indicator began to blink in warning. "We need to leave," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We don't want to be caught here in the dark." As they made their way out of the cabin, their footsteps silent across the bare earth, the questions that swirled in their minds, the identity of the skeleton, the purpose of the cabin, the meaning of the strange objects and writings, all collided into a cloud of anxiety that made it hard to breathe, much less think. Bennett pushed shut the door to his room, and he and Smutty pushed the walls back into place so that they were once again indistinguishable from any other place in the hallway. He quickly returned the keys to the desk and pulled the cover down, hurrying back to the kitchen and the exit. All three breathed a sigh of relief as they emerged from the house and into the daylight. But they shared a strange feeling, as if the world they had known before all their lives had changed. The journey home was a blur, their minds preoccupied, in conversation only bits of questions here and there. Smutty climbed into his beat-up truck and mumbled that he'd call Bennett later as he pulled out of the driveway. Sophia looked at Bennett. "You okay?" He nodded. "I think so. Are you?" "Yeah," she smiled. "Let me borrow your computer tonight. I need to go home, but I want to do some research later." "Sure, go ahead." She ran upstairs, grabbed the computer, and came back down. smiling at Bennett with a combination of shock and disbelief. "This is crazy." He could only nod. She leaned up to kiss him. "I'll call you later." Then she turned, and he was left standing alone in a dark house with no power. He made his way to the kitchen, realizing he hadn't moved the food yet. His attempts to salvage anything from the mostly warm refrigerator felt like a pointless gesture in the face of the greater mystery that now consumed his thoughts. The images of the skeleton and the cabin refused to release their grip upon his psyche, and in the recess of his subconscious there was a whisper that something was very, very wrong.